I have a little bit of OC, but none of it is paranormal. Be me, 17. Recently got my license. Enjoying the newfound freedom, I would often go on long drives at night, usually to nowhere in particular. Driving one night around 2 a.m. I pull into an all-night gas station in my dinky little small town. On my way in, I notice this old man standing by a parked motorcycle. He gives me a wave and a nod. I nod back on reflex. As I'm getting some coffee, I look back over my shoulder and he's staring right at me through the glass front. A little weird, but whatever. As I'm shuffling through the store trying to decide on a snack and wondering if the cashier would card me for cigs, I keep looking back and he's continuing to stare at me. A little sketched out, but it's a very small town and, my dad being well known in the local car show scene, most of the older folks know me. I figure he must recognize me from one of the car shows and prepare for the usual awkward old people small talk when I get back out the door. It is interesting the weird leaps in logic your brain makes when you're trying to convince yourself everything is okay. He nods to me again, I nod back, and then I get in my car, watching him out of the corner of my eye. I start the ignition, his motorcycle starts up. I pull to the exit, he's right behind me. As I start to drive around, he's, you guessed it, following me. Now, I'm essentially just driving in circles, having no particular destination. After he follows me through a couple of these circles, we come up to a four-way intersection near the local middle school. I put on my left blinker, stop, then start turning left. He, of course, starts following me to the left. Suddenly I cut to the right and go straight instead. He follows suit. Something I distinctly remember from this incident is that I was listening to Perturbator and at this moment a sample from the Terminator or some shit was used. The bit where a woman says something like he doesn't feel pity or pain and he will never stop until you are dead. Of course, being a dumb teenager, I shit bricks. So no shit, there I am. An old motorcycle guy now undoubtedly following me. Luckily, these are windy back roads through the woods, and I know them well by this point. We get to a sharp corner and I floor it as soon as I clear the curve. Then wrench the wheel and accidentally Tokyo drift my way into this small side road, then into someone's driveway. Immediately kill my lights, then engine. I never heard the motorcycle go by, so I waited for a while. Turn the engine on, turn off the side road back the way I came. Go home. Never saw motorcycle man again. Maybe it wouldn't have been so scary if it happened to me now, but at the time I was terrified and my adrenaline was through the roof. There are two more, very short, incidents that happened whilst driving around at night much later in life when I worked the graveyard shift. Much later. Be me, 20. Working contract security, graveyard shift. Live off on my own at this point in a not so great neighborhood. Bad enough that I kept my Mosin loaded and propped against the door frame. No handgun because 20. Driving to work. Stop at stoplight. A white woman in a black hoodie runs up and tries to open the passenger side door. Lay on the horn and floor it through the red light, no other cars were around anyways. That's how I learned to roll through red lights, and also tangentially how I came to own a fucking Hi-Point CF380. It was the first handgun I could find through private transfer and it lived in my glove box until I was old enough to walk into a store and buy a proper handgun. As an aside, that winter in the same area I found a dead homeless guy on the side of the road. I was about to pull over, and then noticed the car behind me happened to be a cop, so I figured he could deal with it. This is one that still really bothers me when I think about how fucking dumb I was. Be me, still 20. On my way to graveyard shift again. Stop at gas station for an energy drink. Get back in car. Suddenly a knock on the driver's side window. Scares the shit out of me. There's a different white woman in a black hoodie. Crack the window. She asks if I have a cig she can bum. Until very recently, I had been a smoker, and so on reflex I said, "Oh, yeah, 1 second." Turn, pop open glove box. I vividly remember that I saw some sort of movement in the passenger side window, but I thought at the time that it was just my reflection. Brush the good old high point out of the way looking for cigs. Remember that I quit and don't have any in there for once. Turn back, the woman is gone. That's weird, but whatever, stranger things have happened. Drive to work. As I pull into the parking lot, I notice that the passenger's side mirror is folded in. Definitely wasn't like that earlier in the drive. I used it when I switched to the right lane so I could pull into that gas station.
Thanks Rosie Anon. We'll read after I'm done with some assignments. Cheers.
I hope you enjoy them, Mr. Gay S. I have one more to share, but it's a big difference from the rest. After I left that contractor security job, a few weird things happened on the job there. Maybe I'll tell some of those stories eventually. I went to work at a psychiatric hospital, graveyard shift. Still do. I'm what's called a technician, which is really just the corporate word for an orderly. The nurses do what the doctors tell them to do, and us techs do what the nurses tell us to do. I'm going to be as scant on the details as possible, because I think this story must have wound up in the media eventually, and I'd rather not dox myself. Show up for the usual nightly grind. Go to report, fuck around on my phone instead of paying attention. We've had no new admissions in my hall, I know all the patients, so whatever. Not like I'm going to see many of the patients out of bed aside from that one psychotic patient that paces the hall giggling all night anyways. For those that don't know, in a hospital like that the techs do checks, which entails poking a head into each patient's room and ensuring that they're still alive. At my hospital, we do this a minimum of every 15 minutes, sometimes more often, or even constant observation depending on the acuity of the patient. First round of checks. Female patient buck naked in bed, no covers. God damn it. I'd rather not get accused of sexual misconduct, so I trade hallways with the other tech on the unit so she can look at that woman's ass all night. Don't know the patients on this hallway, but I'm sure they'll sleep anyways. Indeed, they're all asleep, except for one. On my first round of checks, the patient asks me,
"Is it time to wake up yet?"
"Well, it's about midnight. Why don't you try to get some rest?"
"Oh, okay. Sorry. I'm sorry."
Sure, it's okay, yada yada yada. From the way the patient spoke, it was clear right off the bat that they had some kind of intellectual disability. This is pretty odd, because we have a unit for those with that sort of disability, and I do not work on it. I should also note that most of the rooms in the hospital have 2 beds. This patient had a roommate, who was stone cold asleep. The patient stays awake, and we have a similar interaction on most of the checks I do going forward. Patient asks some unremarkable question, I answer, patient repeatedly apologizes. Another thing to note is that usually when you're on checks, you linger in the doorway for a while to really make sure you're seeing/hearing breathing from any sleeping patients. However, I did not want to do that on this room, because the intellectually disabled patient was clearly very anxious and I didn't want to do anything which might keep them from falling asleep. This isn't a problem for that patient, because they are moving around/talking/etc., but it did mean I wasn't being particularly mindful of their roommate. With roommates out like a light anyways, certainly won't be making any trouble. About an hour and a half goes by like this. I notice that the roommate's position in bed hasn't altered at all that I've noticed, which is a little strange. Most people move around at least a bit in their sleep. On the next check, I do linger in the doorway. Intellectually disabled patient comes up to the doorway and starts yammering out more apologies, seems very upset. Of course I them that it's okay, it's just my job to come check on them, they're not in trouble for staying up or anything, etc. etc. This keeps happening when I try to linger there at all to check on the roommate. Finally doing a check and I ask the disabled patient if they would like to try some chamomile tea to help them sleep.
Yeah, if it's okay. That would be nice. I'm sorry.
I'm sure you can see where this is going. Of course it's okay. I have to check on the rest of the patients, so why don't you head up to the nurse's station and ask the people there to get you some tea? Patient says okay, heads up there. Coming back from the rest of the checks, I stop back at that room to really get a good look at the roommate. I couldn't definitively see a rising/falling of the chest. Now, this on its own is not particularly alarming. With some people, especially if they're under more than one blanket, it can be almost impossible to see respirations. However, combined with the roommate's weird behaviors, it's cause for alarm, so I alert the charge nurse. Other tech keeps disabled patients distracted. Nurse goes and pops her head into the room. Comes back, tells me it's probably fine. I trust the nurse's judgment on this far more than my own because I am a brainlet with no medical training and she is, well, a nurse. Now I'm kind of embarrassed for triggering a bit of a false alarm. Things keep on as they were for another check or two, then the flow tech shows up to take my hallway while I have my lunch break. I come back, flow tech is in the middle of a round of checks, so I'm just standing behind the nurse's station and I guess now's a good time to glance at the report sheet for my new hallway. The reports sheets really don't show much, but they do have a section with a line or two explaining how the patient presented to the emergency room. Get to patient in question. History of moderate intellectual disability. Presents with psychosis. This is the big one. Endorsing homicidal ideation, auditory/command hallucinations to kill family. Well, that explains how the patient wound up on the unit for psychotics/suicidals instead of the ID/DD wards. Other tech comes back, nothing out of the ordinary. But now I'm very suspicious. I swallow my embarrassment and insist the charge nurse comes with me to check on the room again. We enter the room. Disabled patient curls up in bed, silent and facing away from us. We get near the roommate's bed and the nurse says,
"Something is wrong. Call a code."
Everything from the rest of that day is sort of a blur. The roommate was still warm, but was not breathing and had no pulse. The code card arrived, along with techs and a few nurses from the other units. CPR was performed, but we all knew it was too late. Of course, because the CPR was not halted until the patient was on an ambulance leaving the property, it was not listed as a death in the hospital, but instead went down as a death en route to a medical hospital. I didn't get fired or anything, though I really should have been. The only reason I didn't is because two other techs and the charge nurse had also checked on the patient and did not realize they were dead. Of course, us already being understaffed didn't help matters. Hospital brass couldn't afford to fire all four of us, I guess. The disabled patient was taken by the local police. I'm sure they wound up in the state psychiatric hospital where everyone who is found not guilty by reason of insanity ends up. I'm sure throughout this I've sounded incredibly incompetent and callous. I suppose there's no defense I can make against those claims. I work in a different, much better hospital now. I take my job far more seriously, and I never let a little potential embarrassment or annoyance from co-workers prevent me from raising the alarm when something seems off. Luckily, they've all been false alarms since then. The memories of that night are sort of floaty and distant. Like trying to remember a dream weeks after you had it. Not a day goes by that I'm able to fall asleep without thinking of that night. I'm sure the nurse and those other techs feel the same way. The part that makes me angry is how everyone told us it wasn't our fault. The supervisor. Our other co-workers. The ambulance guys. The cops. My priest. I know it was our fault, and mine above all. 4 hours I was there, every 15 minutes, and I failed that patient wholly and unforgivably. I don't mean this story to be any sort of warning against psychiatric hospitals. This was a long time ago and, as I came to learn once I moved to a new hospital, the standards of that one were borderline criminally low. The training and oversight were horrible, there wasn't nearly enough staff, etc. etc. I promise you the vast majority of psych hospitals are genuinely helpful places and you ought to go to one if you're in danger of hurting yourself or experiencing psychosis. Of course, I saw more bodies there in my career in psych, but that was the only one with even the suspicion of foul play. If you can believe it, I saw more death/injuries in unarmed contract security than I have in psych so far.